Plenty of sun, breezy, pleasant today, high 80.
A morning that changed everything, burned in our memory, breathed deep into our souls.
The federal government saying that the air was safe to breathe, we were never prepared for that.
A day that keeps taking, a death count that keeps rising.
Stephanie Veronica Irby.
Paul Rexford Hughes.
But tonight on Currents News, the resilience that remains, unwavering and unshakable.
It's one of those defining moments in time that changed the way that we think about the world.
Stories shared for a higher purpose. We pledged to never forget. But what about those who will never remember?
And how do I talk to kids about the darkest day in U.S. history?
A new mission that's perhaps the most tolling, teaching the next generation about September 11th, 23 years later. For more than 2 decades, we've heard the bells ring, and it's returned us to that moment in time. September 11th, 2001, the day that keeps on taking our lives, our health, our emotional and spiritual well-being. I'm Christine Persichetti. Welcome to our special coverage of 9/11 23 years later. We'll take a look back and bring you the inspiring stories of those who've risen above their suffering, not just on that fateful day, but everyone since. We start with a Manhattan law firm that's helping the victims of Ground Zero related illnesses and is looking for others where the dust may still be lingering. Jessica Easthope has the story.
Federal government saying that the air was safe to breathe, we were never prepared for that. So, so there was no breathing protection.
Breathing in that dust has proved more deadly over the last 20 years than the terrorist attack itself, a truth Richard Allies knows all too well. He was a battalion chief coming off of a 24-hour shift at his firehouse in Canarsie when he jumped onto a rescue truck for a job that would define his life and career. A ride that took him to Ground Zero for 3 straight days. He says his Catholic faith carried him through. It kept him strong inside as he was weakened by the horrific sights and sounds. The air surrounding the wreckage had the same toxic pH level as Drano. Allies learned just how harmful it was when he was diagnosed with skin cancer.
The paper masks that we were using, they would clog up. You basically discarded that. So I kind of went, maskless pretty much for the first couple of days.
Allies now works at Barasch McGarry law firm, helping other survivors get the justice they deserve through the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund and World Trade Center Health Program.
Not a day goes by without one of my clients dying. It's truly heartbreaking.
Michael Barasch, the managing partner at Barasch McGarry, defines a 9/11 survivor as anyone who lived or worked in downtown Manhattan following the attack. The firm still has 25,000 clients. Sadly, 1,500 have died from 9/11 related illnesses, including 68 different cancers. 80% of all 9/11 first responders have enrolled in the Victim Compensation Fund. But you didn't have to be running into the towers to get sick. Those running from them were just as susceptible.
We're coming down with the same illnesses. We're dying from the same illnesses. This is not just about first responders.
This anniversary, Allies and Barasch McGarry are encouraging survivors to look at their health within the scope of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The day might live forever in their minds, but it doesn't have to live in their bodies. In Lower Manhattan, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
If you or someone you know is suffering 9/11 related symptoms, you can register for the Victim Compensation Fund and World Trade Center Health Program at vcf.gov. This year, the New York City Fire Department added 32 names to its World Trade Center Memorial Wall, all members who died of 9/11 related illnesses. One of the names, Fallen FDNY chaplain Msgr. Delendick. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has his story from downtown Brooklyn.
FDNY chaplain, Reverend Msgr John E. Delendick, November 23rd, 2023.
Wednesday would have been Msgr John Delendick's 75th birthday. Fellow firefighter Danny Prince was with him at the very end of his battle with 9/11-related pancreatic cancer.
He kept fighting right up to the end. He never gave up. He always believed tomorrow's going to be a better day, and he just inspired people.
Msgr Delendick and 31 others were honored Wednesday at a memorial service at FDNY headquarters, their names added to the World Trade Center Memorial Wall. As of this year, the number of department members who have died of 9/11-related illnesses has surpassed the number of members who died that day.
He used to talk about all the funerals that he did, and he was there for everybody. He was just a foot soldier.
At the service, the FDNY vowed to never forget, using Msgr Delendick's words as examples of that promise. Though he and hundreds of other members didn't die on 9/11, they paid the ultimate price for their service on one of the darkest days in our nation's history.
FDNY chaplain Msgr John Delendick, he told the crowd, "We come here to remember them and to thank them for the service they have done for us."
Msgr Sean Ogle, Diocese of Brooklyn's vicar for clergy, and Msgr Delendick were classmates from high school through their ordination.
It's so fitting he has this recognition for what he did as a fire department chaplain, because from day one, he had a very, very pastoral heart.
This year, on the 23rd anniversary of September 11th, Msgr Delendick's legacy is looked to for hope by members of the FDNY, past and present.
He's truly a saint, and he's up there with Michael Judge right now.
How often did they invoke the name of God in this ceremony? That's what John sought to bring to people. I think that would be his greatest legacy.
And now his service and sacrifice are memorialized forever. In downtown Brooklyn, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Now to the story of another firefighter who made the ultimate sacrifice. His name was Father Michael Judge, but the history books know him by another name. Victim 0001, the first recorded casualty. To this day, the bravest still honor him, retracing his last steps. Emily Drewby took that walk to remember some years ago.
Hundreds marching in silence, footsteps and color guard commands the only sounds. An eerie scene in such a loud city as this group honored the life of a Catholic priest and American hero, Father Michael Judge. Father James Hansen calls him a role model.
Father Michael Judge and what he did on September 11th is exactly what I think priests do. They lay their life down for their flock.
As an FDNY chaplain, on 9/11, Father Judge left St. Francis of Assisi Church in Manhattan for the Towers, providing comfort and prayers for New York's bravest. Sal Casano was with him.
We looked at each other and, a head nod to each other and said, it's going to be a tough day, Father Mike. I think we're going to need a lot more chaplains. But he just went about his business. He was going to shepherd all of us up to heaven one day. And that's what he was doing that day. He was taking care of his flock.
Father Judge gave his life for his flock after being injured at the site. His body was found and brought to St. Peter's Church. The Walk of Remembrance starts at St. Francis of Assisi near Penn Station with a Catholic Mass and the Rosary, explains walk organizer John Bates.
We say the Rosary, which is what Father Michael Judge was doing that morning in the Towers. We do that to honor him and, of course, honor Mary.
Then they walk almost 3 miles all the way down here to St. Peter's Church in the Financial District, making stops along the way, honoring the lives lost that day and also the lives lost to illnesses since. Marcher Bob Hickey was a lifelong friend. He still remembers finding out his friend was gone.
When I found out exactly how it happened, it was like I wasn't surprised. He's there helping people. He's there doing what he always did.
The walk started by another friend of Father Judge, NYPD Detective Stephen McDonald, paralyzed after being shot on the job, dying 30 years later from his injuries. No longer on this earth, but this, the memorial he created for his friend, is. In the Financial District, Emily Drewby, Currents News.
If you missed that remembrance walk, don't worry. The Diocese of Brooklyn's tablet newspaper has cataloged other religious memorials you can visit this weekend. There's a detailed pull-out map of beautiful statues and monuments located across the diocese in this week's version. Just pick it up at your local parish. Still ahead on our special coverage.
It really does hit you harder, especially when they're round number or big number anniversaries.
They say time heals, but milestones have ways of making the memories flood back and overwhelm. How many are coping with the worst day in U.S. history? And later, explaining that unforgettable day to those too young to remember. Even though 23 years have passed, most people still and always will remember where they were on 9/11. Msgr. Robert Romano from Our Lady of Guadalupe, who is Assistant Chief Chaplain for the NYPD, is one of those people. I spoke with him in the days leading up to this somber anniversary and asked him where he was on that fateful morning.
I immediately went downstairs, said the funeral. And while I was saying the funeral directors kept coming in and out of the church, something that they never do. And I said, something's wrong. And as I got to the back of the church, they told me that not only that the building was hit, but the second building was hit and both had collapsed. Mm-hmm. And I said, I have to run. And when we got there, I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, go to the hospitals. So I made myself available, did blessings to the bodies, and then I went back to police headquarters, and there we set up a family center for people to come. There was no communication whatsoever. The radios were out, the telephones were out, cell phones were out, regular cell phone. Electricity was out.
Sure.
But got to the police plaza, and families started to come in and waiting for their loved ones to come in. It was a very, very, very difficult day that day, you know, just right at the beginning, because people just didn't know where their loved ones were.
Right, they were hoping they were going to find them. I remember all the pictures up.
Yeah.
How did that day affect you physically and mentally?
It has been a part of my life for 20 years. I do suffer from post-traumatic stress, and it was because of the silence of the day. Believe it or not, with all the fire engines, all the police cars, sirens coming down there, there was very little sound because of all the particulate matter that was floating in there. Still to this day, when I go to bed at night, I have to have TV on. It goes off sometime in the middle of the night, but when I fall asleep, I just can't take that silence.
You need something in the background.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the death toll that day. Nearly 3,000 were killed, but so many more have died from 9/11 related illnesses since then. So your job is not done. Talk about ministering to the victims and their families and how their faith has helped them.
The original day, 23 members of the New York City Police Department were killed. We worked with their families very closely. Many of the police officers that were killed were friends of mine. I wear a band for a police officer and his brother, a firefighter. They were both killed that day. The two sons of this family, and they lost both their sons. The police officer had baptized his baby on September 1st. September 11th, we were looking for him. It's been tough. But things start to change in the police department. Families become closer to us. But unfortunately now what we're seeing is the remnants of 9/11 20 years later. And it's not going to end. People say it's over, it's part of history. People are dying every single day. In the police department, since 9/11, we've had over 200 people die from 9/11 disease. But we don't know about the people that worked in the building that day. We don't know about the iron workers who worked there for those months after 9/11. So 9/11 is alive and well, and it rears its ugly head constantly.
And no matter how much time goes by, Msgr. Romano and so many others are still coping with the events of 9/11. And some anniversaries can be harder than others.
It's one of those defining moments in time that changed the way that we think about the world.
The memories and the images of 9/11 are overwhelming for some.
It really does hit you harder, especially when they're round number or big number anniversaries.
It's called the anniversary effect, an increase in distress around a traumatic event. Ken Yeager, the director of the Stress, Trauma, and Resilience Program at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, says this 9/11 anniversary may be even more troubling, especially with the turmoil in Afghanistan. If you're struggling to cope, Yeager says acknowledge those feelings. Talk to someone you trust.
All of these are naturally occurring emotions, and rather than trying to avoid them, it's probably more important to name them and to call them out.
With 9/11 and in any tragic situation, Yeager says using coping skills can help.
Taking a walk, giving yourself time to sit and take a few deep breaths until you work through this, or just actually doing something to commemorate the tragic losses that occurred on that day.
And as a new generation is exposed to 9/11, Yeager says to remember to talk to your children, help them work through any feelings that may come up. If you need help coping on this anniversary or at any time, Catholic Charities is here for you. Just call 718-722-6001 to find a mental health clinic near you or visit their website, ccbq.org. One man is getting through his grief by putting pen to paper.
It is with the deepest regret. Deepest regret.
Those words are about Jim Hart's wife and a love he says that is everlasting. His late wife, one of the thousands who have died of 9/11 related illnesses. He'll be the first to admit some days are better than others. And when the hard days come, Jim found the only way to get through his grief was to pour his love for his late wife onto the page in books of poetry dedicated to her. Current News' Jessica Easthope sat down with Jim and has his story from Borough Park.
The books that fill the shelves of Jim Hart's Borough Park home library have defined his life.
The first time she loved me, I stood in the deepness of her eyes.
But these words define his love. They're his own, and they're dedicated to his wife, Sue.
And I knew right then I had found that once-in-a-lifetime love perfection. She was the love of my life. It's hard to this day. You know, some days it seems like 3 minutes ago, and some days it seems like 3 lifetimes ago.
Loving Sue and Missing Sue are two of Jim's books of poetry.
In your living room with no lights except for the TV.
Sue was and still remains his creative muse. Sue was told she had terminal gallbladder cancer just 3 months before she passed away in 2020. Doctors said it was 9/11 related, a diagnosis that brought Jim back to that day 22 years ago, when Sue was in charge of facilities at City Hall.
Being a husband, I said, go home. And she said, a manager of facilities are in danger here. I can't leave now.
Jim saw with his own eyes what was waiting at Ground Zero. He volunteered there after work as a chief of department for New York City Sanitation, hoping to find survivors.
Everything, and I mean everything, the streets, the signs, the buildings, were this kind of tannish color. You could not tell where you were.
He wished his wife, who was a dedicated partner, mother, and employee, hadn't been so dedicated in that moment.
Not only she stayed the first day, I knew Sue, and I knew she was going to go back. It was you wish she had listened to you and not got to work.
Since 9/11, 69 types of cancer have been linked to the toxic dust at Ground Zero. Sue's duty to her work and to the people of New York wasn't unappreciated.
Susan Hart has been one of City Hall's true heroes.
But as of March of 2023, she and nearly 6,000 others have paid the ultimate price for it. Now, Jim is left with 50 years of memories and 2 works of poetry that have been published in journals all over the world.
I never expected to be the one who lived on.
His love for Sue memorialized forever.
There are a lot of tear-stained pages. There were no blank pages. The ideas flowed as fast as I fell in love with him.
If he could, Jim would rewrite history. But instead, he writes about Sue.
Never knew how Adam mourned his missing rib.
In Borough Park, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
You can get Jim's books, Loving Sue and Missing Sue, on Amazon. Still to come on Currents News, we'll introduce you to a first responder turned author who's teaching the day we'll never forget to those too young to remember it firsthand. The events of 9/11 and everything that happened since is a hard story to tell, but it's one we have to. We as a nation promise to never forget, and now it's our mission to teach those who will never remember. One Port Authority police officer has turned his 9/11 story into a book that is inspiring the next generation. Jessica Easthope has his story.
Will Jimeno is an author.
Like I said here, instead our country pulled together like never before.
His stories are about overcoming fear and living your faith. But there's nothing fictional about them. He did both on September 11th, 2001.
I always say, well, if God left me on this earth for a reason, is as a survivor, it's my responsibility and obligation to help other people.
It shows you me as an immigrant.
But get this, one of his 9/11 books is for kids. Immigrant American Survivor is about that day, his journey to the U.S. from Colombia, and his Catholic upbringing.
My actual police ID and shield.
In the years following 9/11, Will was asked to talk to young students who were afraid to fly, and his speaking engagements evolved into a message: never give up.
And how do I talk to kids about the darkest day in U.S. history? And I think it just came from my heart. I had the same trials and tribulations as every other child. So what I want people to understand is I am no different than them.
The actual collapse happening.
In the children's book, you see the true story of Jimeno, a Port Authority police officer, trapped, crushed beneath the World Trade Center's 220 stories of concrete and steel.
One of the things I've always done to my wife and my daughter was the sign language, I love you. So I took both my hands, I crossed them over my chest because I figured I was going to die. Hopefully they'll find me like this and be able to tell my wife I was thinking about her.
When they found us,
after 13 hours, he was only one of two people pulled alive from underneath the collapse. To the world who watched in horror on that day, 9/11 was a tragedy. But for Will, he's been able to take the good with the bad.
You know, Jesus died for us. If we just looked that they nailed him on the cross, then it's just a tragedy. It's not a tragedy because he gave his life for us. On 9/11, I don't look at what the terrorists did. I look at all the good that day.
That's a lesson he hopes to pass on to the next generation. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
You can buy Jimeno's 9/11 children's book, Immigrant American Survivor, on Amazon. Paperback and digital editions are available. And that is this special edition of Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. In honor of this somber anniversary, we leave you with some images and memorials, permanent promises that we will never forget.